Hello everyone, my name is Alicja Sadownik. I'm an associate professor at the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences and a work package leader at the Kindergarten Knowledge Center there. Welcome to my keynote speech, which is titled Research as an Arena for Migrant Families Dealing with Crisis and Transition to ECEC in Another Sociocultural Context. As you know, this talk was planned to be delivered live and face-to-face at the wonderful place that you may have heard of, which is the University of Oxford, which because of the COVID-19 crisis we can admire only as a Zoom background. However, I need to mention that immediately after both Norway and England have declared the end of pandemic, which I hope will be soon, I will stand in the University of Oxford's beautiful garden and deliver the same speech. So for your information, I will be there no matter the season, no matter the weather, and no matter the audience. Speaking of which, I would like to invite you to join me. My motive, which manifests itself in the desire to come to Oxford and deliver the speech and discuss it with you anyway, is actually a motive to sustain and preserve the word as we know it. Particularly to sustain and preserve the academic word as we know it, where keynoting at Oxford is an unimaginable privilege and where early childhood education and care is a growing, promising field with an increasing number of PhD students to whom we want to provide the very best support and international networks. To sustain and preserve may not be the only motives that emerges when facing a crisis, just as COVID-19 is not the only possible crisis. We've heard about crises before the pandemic, and we've been through some as societies, institutions, and individuals. The crisis I want to focus on in my presentation, or rather the social phenomenon that I will look at through the lens of the crisis, is that of parental transition to early childhood education and care settings. In particular, I will consider migrant caregivers' transitions to ECC in Norway. On the one hand, migrant parents' transition to ECC follows their migration trajectory to another country, but on the other hand, it also shapes it. Why call it a crisis? Well, because of the complexity of the changes and processes that the caregivers must address, and thus the changed cultural and institutional demands and expectation they must experience. I will show this complexity by using research material that I've gathered over years of interviewing professionals and policymakers, as well as caregivers with migrant and majority backgrounds in Norway. The research material used in this presentation comprises then diverse interviews, meetings, and talks with different actors and stakeholders involved in the ECC sector. Caregivers from minority and majority backgrounds, as I said, ECC teachers, migration pedagogues, headmasters, and policymakers, which altogether, I believe, provide insights into the motivation and perceptions of people representing diverse standpoints and diverse trajectories into and within the institutions of ECC. Thus, the material offers various perspectives on why migrant parents' transitions can be seen as a crisis. Vygotsky, when talking about crisis, touches on the plan of the individual and his or her development, which in a very short time can take a stormy, impetuous, and sometimes catastrophic character, which, however, is a chance for development. Fleer and Hedegaard, in an array of publications, take a wider look on the context that developing child is participating in and show us that what may seem stormy, impetuous, and unfocused in one institutional context may be valued as lively, explorative, and positive in another institutional context, and vice versa. For example, one ECEC setting may value staying seated and completing an individual activity such as forming the letter H, while the tradition and practice at home involves a lot of movements, geographical roaming, and communicating through the walls and between rooms, like at Andrews. who we read about in Marianne Hedegaard's wonderful paper of 2010. Recognizing that institutional perspectives mediate the individual's development is of greatest importance, and this is what Fleer and Hedegaard highlight in their reading of Leontiev as well. Development motives and activities do not represent a straightforward process of transforming primary biological needs into culturally valued motives. As Hedegaard and Fleer noted in 2014, what is missing in this theory is the conceptualization of the historical institutionalized demands that mediate this process. ECEC institutions often shape the migration trajectory of the whole family, so recognizing institutional perspectives and the institutional plan is equally important when talking about migrant and minority parents and caregivers. It allows us to see and understand both that they have crossed state borders and migrated from one country to another, one culture to another, or one workplace to another, but also that their migration is stamped and marked by their very significant companions, who are their children, and who attend particular institutions. If we follow the orange lines in the figure on the slide, we will see that the migrating family travels with specific cultural, historical, and societal luggage, which includes particular understandings and experiences with specific institutions, which may or may not include institutions for early childhood education and care. These understandings and experiences, anchored in cultural values and legal apparatus, will shape the caregiver's perceptions, appreciations, and imagine possible actions, including potential ways of getting involved with ECEC settings in the destination country. If childcare was not institutionalized in the country of origin, the family's entrance into the new country will also be marked by entering an abstract and unfamiliar institution. Whether more or less familiar, ECEC settings are one of the first institutions that migrant families encounter upon arriving in Norway. Their experiences with these institutions pave the way to other institutions, mediating the new culture and society that they are living in. Today, I choose to look at this phenomenon through the lens of crisis. And what is the crisis of arriving in Norway about for parents from war zones or from countries of origin in which ECEC is not institutionalized but is provided by relatives and communities that take care of each other's children? Well, the first stage of the crisis is represented by the mandatory nature of ECEC. This is very interesting because the availability of ECEC services is described in the literature, especially in the literature on children's rights and particularly the right to education, as something very positive, as a necessary condition for realizing the child's right to education. Here, however, we are talking about a right to ECEC that neither the child nor the family can say no to, and this may be critical. Every refugee arriving in Norway must attend an introduction course. It is a part of the asylum deal with Norway. The introduction course demands, however, that refugees who are parents and caregivers must give away their children to the ECEC setting. Their place in the ECEC setting is arranged before the family's arrival. One of the policymakers interviewed about the institutional trajectory of refugee families into Norway described the introduction course as follows. It's a right and a duty. It is a right showing that Norway is not leaving them on their own, but takes care and facilitates the process of becoming an independent citizen who can speak the language, find a job, and take economic care of the children. This is the right they have, and no one can take it away from them, even themselves. They cannot say no to the course. Children of refugee parents are automatically placed in the ECEC setting, barnehage, in Norwegian, so that the parents can attend the course. We fix the ECEC place as soon as we know that the family is coming. First, what we do is to arrange housing that responds to the family's needs, and then reserve a place in a kindergarten in the house neighborhood. The caregivers have 3 days for the child's adaptation in the ECEC service and then must attend the course every day in the next 1 to 3 years. This shows that in case of refugee parents of small children, enrollment in ECEC services is not only accessible, but in a way forced. Even if it's a right developed with the best intentions, it may cause crisis in some vulnerable periods of people's lives and transitions. As one mother from Eritrea shared in an interview, I was very vulnerable at that time. I was separated from my siblings, so many people being killed, many people being cruel, terrible. However, God saved me and my children and sent us here. In Eritrea, we think that when you get children, you die as an individual person. You don't count as yourself. Your children count. You live for them and through them. And at that point, I didn't have anybody else but them. I was living for them and through them, and the first thing that happened here was that they were placed for the whole day in a kindergarten with some strangers. I could not understand why some strangers are taking care of my children. It was hard. I could not just sit, relax with a cup of coffee like the teachers told us in the course. I could not learn the language. I was suffering from anxiety about whether my children are all right. I was missing them the whole day long. This voice and similar voices were brought forward by me and other researchers and language learning teachers on various occasions in our municipality. As a result, policymakers strongly wanted to make the enrollment in CEC services more tailored, more flexible, and more responsive to the family's needs. The same policymakers said later in an interview that Hmm, this is something that we Norwegians could not understand as having a negative effect. It was it was as we do for ourselves, parents to work, children to ECEC setting. Many people in Norway would not have children if there were no ECEC places. We could not see for a very long time that for some refugee families, the connection between parents and children is the most important at the moment of arrival. I see it now and I can affirm that we are working on it, that we are working on making this enrollment more flexible. Either we give the family some time together or we integrate the introduction course with the ECC offer. We are on it. The statements by policymakers show the development of new trajectories they are, that are aimed at providing more culturally and trauma-sensitive enrollment in ECC services, so this dimension of the crisis is being responded to at the level of the local government, but legal apparatus still obligates refugees to start the introduction course right away. It is anyway important to point out that these traumas and crises many people have been through are now thanks to the research being worked on at the institutional and policy levels. Additionally, a grant application was also written where KINDknow, our center, and Bergen municipality are partners to try out diverse, more tailored and flexible ways of enrollment and transition to ECC. But here the research came, however, post factum, after several families have been re-traumatized after arrival in Norway and experienced the ECC institution as the one that took their children away from them, which again might have developed a particular attitude towards ECEC. And the Norwegian literature, for example, Glasser's book 2012 reports that ECC staff find migrant parents more difficult to work with because they seem to be less interested. And maybe they are less interested for a reason, like the reason shared in the narrative of the mother from Eritrea, Or maybe they are interested in other things. Reason for what is invisible for the staff representing institutional demands. Anyway, the other phenomena that I will look at through the lens of crisis now is not the quiet parent, the disinterested parent, but rather the inappropriately noisy parent, the stormy parent, a parent that is misbehaving in the institutional context of the ECEC, a parent that is a problem or so-called pain in the ass. And an ECEC staff team that I followed during some of their regular meetings was discussing the issue of turning parental attention from the clothes to the educational and care work happening in the ECEC setting. The problem was that the short conversations during picking up are about the practical, where is the sweater, or can you get and pack one or another jacket in the child's backpack, and so on. The staff found it difficult to guess what the parent might want to take home in the backpacks, and because after the coronavirus reopening, the parents couldn't come in and find the item themselves, the staff were running back and forth between the building and the gate many times. We almost never guess what is right to pack. They will always ask about something else, always. Why aren't they asking about what the child has done? Also, I made some observations in the ECC setting and observed Norwegian middle-class parents, a few of whom were living in the neighborhood and had children in this ECC setting. Those parents were asking about the activities and never asked about clothes. They had, though, another set of raincoats at home. They were focused on involving the child in the conversation about how the day went in the ECC setting, and this was highly appreciated by the staff as it was exactly fitting the institutional demands on how the parental daily engagement should look like. The refugee parents often ask about clothes or things that their child had in kindergarten. They ask how many diapers were still on the shelf, when it would be time to bring new ones, and what happened to the dress that their daughter had on the other day. After thinking it over and talking to the parents about how they viewed Norway, their lives, and the ECC, I understood that both the Norwegian and the migrant parents were showing in their own ways, by enabling their own cultural resources and by building on own understandings of the institutional demands, that they cared for their children and that they were good parents. Showing that they were good parents was particularly important for parents with refugee backgrounds. They are looking at us, at whether we care enough. They have these childcare services here, and the ECC setting can report that you don't care enough, don't provide clothes or food and so on. So we are always checking the goods and the clothes and all the stuff, which shows good care, that we have an overview of the clothes, what is needed and so on. This was perceived by the parents from this standpoint in order to understand the Norwegian ECC context. Based on the information presented to them in the media and in the introduction course, they developed an understanding of the institutional demands and a motive to satisfy the institutional authority, but it anyway was not in line with the institutional demands represented by the ECC staff. It was something else that counted. "Why do they care so much about the clothes?" asked the staff. "It is so obvious that such things are missing, especially if you don't write the name on it. Why are they so busy with that? Aren't they interested in what the child was doing? What kind of parents are not interested in what the child was doing?" Another misbehaving parent was the parent of a girl who felt excluded by her peers. The parent told me about the situation as follows. My daughter told me day by day that she felt excluded from the children's community, that the other girls always found one or another reason to exclude her from the play. I tried to talk about it to the staff when picking up my daughter, but they didn't want to talk about it. I tried many times with different people, but ended up thinking that they absolutely do not care about the problem. In this case, I relied on my knowledge of the institutional context of the Norwegian ECEC and advised the parent on how to talk about the problem, because any kind of exclusion would not be that easily ignored by a professional who received its education in Norway and who has read the framework plan. I thought then that it must have been about the way the mother was approaching the institution. Of course, it should have been the ECC who made the practices transparent to the mother, but it happened through me, who as a migrant mother also learned at once. I pointed then at 3 points. First, only one of the staff work the late shift, so it's not realistic to fully pay attention to one parent during picking up routine. Second, privacy concerns do not allow discussing sensitive matters where other parents or people can hear. Finally, the Norwegian meeting culture involves starting a conversation about agreeing on a time and place for a meeting at which the matter will be discussed and not starting with the matter itself. I advised this mother not to talk about the problem when picking up the child, but to ask about the possibility of meeting on another day and also to request it in an email. Institutional practices are cultural practices, as Hedegaard writes, so I advised this mother to adopt institutional practices that were not obvious or visible to her because of her cultural background, and thus other ways of behaving within a particular institution. When she called me later, she said, "It worked. They took me seriously. They told me that they were not aware of these exclusion episodes, but they started observations, and in another meeting they told me how they intervene in the case of exclusions and how can I support my daughter to respond to such behaviors, and I was just so impressed by how professional they were." Another example of a misbehaving parent was a father concerned that his child was not learning enough. This father did not get any advice from me, but as he participated in a group discussion, there were other parents who, based on own experiences and insights in the ECC institution, advised him to act in a particular way. He said, "I was very concerned. They don't learn to count, to read. They just play, mostly outside." I spoke in a parental meeting then, saying that this is unacceptable, that this is storage, not early childhood education, with children running in the mud all day and the staff drinking coffee, and that we have to do so much at home with drawing, counting, and fairy tales, as we are truly concerned that our son will be totally uneducated and will not realize his own potential. As a response, I was told that every ECC in Norway is like this. As I said, this father was interviewed in a group, and the mother who heard him responded as follows. "I got another answer from the teacher," she said. "She told me that their focus is on facilitation and then observation and following up on the children's play. She told me also how much the children learn when playing. And so if one is interrogating the teachers about more learning, it might be nice to begin by recognizing place as a great arena for learning. But, and after the but, you can tell your concerns." Hearing another argument, which was a repetition of one pedagogical justification of institutional practices, gave the father insight into the institutional practices and created a motive to act and interact differently with the institution. Differently means in this case more acceptable and more understandable for the institution, which again means in line with the demands anchored in the majority culture, as well as white middle class standards for behavior within institutions. When participating in the research, both he and the previous mother redefined both their motives to act as well as possible ways to act. The redefined acts of communication were more understandable and digestible for the ECEC institutions and thus allowed the parents to be taken seriously. The research became then a space where the parental crisis, concerns and frustrations took a culturally and institutionally valued form, enabling the parents to feel and participate more as equal partners. However, becoming equal partners happened through customizing own concerns and making the display of them acceptable for the staff, which means in line with white middle-class standards for communication and so-called good dialogue. The research equipped the parents with necessary capitals, in a way, insights within the institution's ways of talking, vocabulary, and empowered them to activate these capitals when interacting with the ECC. The parents were very satisfied with the results of communication, but aren't we actually here talking about a kind of fancy colonization, a kind of assimilation and adjustment to majority cultural practices, or a non-violent, silent, peaceful brainwashing and cultural imperialism? Well, these are not new dilemmas that were discovered in my research, but matters that have been widely written about. For example, in 2018 paper of Solberg, Solberg argues that majority discourses dominate ECEC institutions in Norway, creating the expectation that parents from minority backgrounds should adapt and adjust, which again results in their passiveness in contact with the services. This is in line with the findings of de Gua, Van Leer, Van den Broek, Van Hotte, Solberg, as well as Laurent and Horvat. Laurent and Horvat study from 1999 on different capitals being activated when parents of colors representing different social classes were interacting with schools, show that middle class politeness and good manners made the parents of colors even denying obvious form of institutional racism and its history. This was the effect of capitals or motives being activated when meeting and responding to particular institutional demands. This draws a great context for the importance of small qualitative participatory studies like Lastica and Lipponen from 2016 and some studies of mine, of course, which stresses the great importance of individualized attention, compassion, reflection, and understanding of the backpack the family is coming with. The question is nevertheless still how to include without colonization and how to recognize the difference without positive discrimination. And I hope that cultural historical wholeness approach can be our compass and hope. Hedegaard in 2005 publication conceptualizes culture as practice within different institutions and as a societal field of traditions of practice where different value positions can be differentiated. In relation to my research and the crisis of transition to ECC, I'm asking how research can facilitate the intercultural character of an institution so deeply anchored in own culture as ECC is. The examples I show are partly satisfying. They show some of so-called positive effects, but raise many ethical dilemmas, and I want research to be at least aware of the ethical dilemmas when, if at all, becoming a space for dealing with crises, in this case, healing traumas and dealing with caregivers and professionals' concerns. Becoming a space where cultural and institutional contexts are explained to the individuals in their histories and complexities so that individuals are empowered and enabled to act. However, I'm also asking how research can help to deal with crisis not only by transforming individual motives and actions, but also by transforming institutions, however, not ceding the whole responsibility to the institution of early childhood education and care, for example, but making the partnership between academia, municipality, and ECEC institutions, or by making a sustainable intersection where by using academia's resources, parents can get more engaged on their own terms and the staff can get support in dealing with their concerns. For example, and this is partly already happening through our research centers at Monash University and Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, who are working in close partnerships with in-service ECC settings. And I hope it will continue and develop. And I believe that in the new institutional bubbles of institutional partnerships, the institutions with their different traditions can become mirrors and create standpoints from which reflection of our own practices and values underpinning them will be possible. Thank you very much for your attention and see you in the beautiful garden of the University of Oxford after the pandemics. Bye bye.